I'm Todd for G66. Welcome to another Tuesday Tone Tip. In today's video, I want to look into the USA lead models on the Axe-FX 3 and FM3. These are my personal favorite amp models in the Fractal ecosystem, and they're the amp models that I use the most when I'm recording, and the amp model that I use in all my live presets. However, these amps are a little bit harder to dial in. Whenever you dial up an amp model, all the basic authentic controls will default to 5 out of 10. And while this sounds fantastic on something like the Atomica High or a Brit 800, they really don't on these amps, mostly due to the circuit design of the real-world Boogie Mark series that these amp models are based on. Basically what's going on is, in the preamp section, you can see the tone stack is set to pre. That means that the bass, middle, and treble controls are placed before the main gain stage. So that kind of means the bass, middle, and treble form this like three-way gain control. I think of it like a texture control or a character control. If we have a listen to it at the stock settings, it's going to be quite congested and muddy, and in my opinion, not very pleasant at all as a starting point. But that's fine. We can immediately clean that up by turning the bass all the way down and increasing the treble. I also like to dip the mid-range control and the presence control. The presence is very much tailored to taste. If you're using a darker impulse response, crank it up. If you're using a brighter impulse response, bring it down, which reminds me, I'm using two factory cabs, these York Audio Recto cabs, which I really like the sound of. Let's just have a listen to the texture of the distortion happening now, because it's a lot clearer and a lot less muddy by bringing the bass down. That's removing low end from the gain circuit and bringing the treble up, which is going to add articulation and add some upper partial. So that's significantly clearer, but it's lacking body. It's lacking like an overall kind of sculpted tone to it. And we would do that using the output EQ. It defaults to this 5-band Mark style EQ, just like the real world amps it is modeling. And my go-to is basically a kind of variation of the classic V curve. I like to increase the 80 Hertz slider and really pull out the 750 slider. The 240 slider to me is kind of like a honk control. I like to bring that down, and I like to add a little bit of the 2200 slider. These are just my go-to settings. This 6600 slider we'll talk about in a second, because much like the presence control, that is really going to have a drastic effect on your high end. If you're using a darker impulse, you want to bring this up. If you're using a brighter impulse, bring it down. But this is pretty close to my ideal boogie kind of sound now. You can hear there, it's got that classic low-end chunk going on. It's not too nasal or honky, and the distortion is really nice and clear. I just like to use the overdrive control and turn it all the way up to get even more gain. And it is really sweet to play on the neck pickup there. You can tell this amp makes me excited. On the ideal page, we have access to something that would occur on the real amps, say a Boogie Mark IV. It has a pull fat control. So we can activate the fat control, and this is just going to thicken everything up. It's really nice if you want to play lead. So that sounds beautiful for leads. We'll get onto how you could assign that, say, to your lead scene on and have it off for your rhythm scene for really tight rhythm sound in just a second. One other little trick I like, let's turn the fat switch back off, is to go into the preamp tab and to turn this low cut frequency up to about 250 Hertz. This is just going to tighten everything up again. Again, it's like being able to pull the bass control into negative values. That's how I would think about it. If you were using something like a Strat or a single coil guitar, you would probably stay away from that low cut frequency, but I like it with humbuckers. So let's hear this with a couple of different cabinet IRs. My main cab that I use for a lot of my stuff live is this cabinet that I made of my Marshall cabinet. From memory, the three mics here are a Shure SM7B, a Royer 121, and there's something else mixed in there that I forget, but it was another dynamic mic. Just got a slightly different character to the York Audio factory cab. You can hear that's a little bit darker sounding. There's a little bit more low end in that particular IR. So what I could do is just go to the amp, and with the output EQ, I could drop this 80 Hertz slider, which does. And if I wanted to make it a bit brighter, I could add some of the 6600 slider. Again, this is all to taste. Use your ears here. There's no set rules in practice. It's not a recipe that you have to follow strictly. It's more an overall approach. There's a couple of other really great sounding factory IRs in here. I like these 2x12 USA ML impulses, again, based around a 2x12 boogie cab. In this case, though, these are a lot brighter. Have a listen. So I'd bring the 6600 slider down maybe to -2, and the low end's got a different thing going on. Maybe I'd bring it up a bit higher. And finally, probably, if I was going for just purely a lead sound, I would go with these impulses, these 4x12 Black Shadow impulses. Let's put these back to where I had them before, so my kind of go-to settings, and this is going to be considerably darker than anything on here. I could go and crack the fat switch on right here, and I've got a beautiful smooth lead tone. And if I wanted that to be brighter, this is again where the 6600 slider and the presence control come in. Let's just try the presence. So you can see there, cranking that 6600 slider to compensate for that much darker IR is super powerful, but if I went back to one of the other cabs, it would be way too bright. So that's how the overall kind of pre-gain structure, graphic EQ, and cabinet choice all interplay with one another. They are really, really important. It's like a three-body problem there. You know, if you increase something over here, you may have to decrease something over here to balance it out. So I really, really enjoy that Black Shadow IR. I'll go back to my main impulse that I use over here for the rest of these. So I'm going to go back to my favored settings right there. And let's have a listen to some of the other USA lead models. I've kind of pre-dialed these in to match my favorite settings here. So let's have a listen to just a straight up USA lead. The Boogie Mark IV has a switch on the back called harmonics or mid-gain. So we've heard the mid-gain, this would be the harmonics mode. That feels a lot tighter and a lot less forgiving to play. If you're purely a metal rhythm player, I would say start with this particular mode. One of my other favorites is this USA 2C++ amp model in here. Just kind of gives you a different variation on the same. As I understand it, this is actually the amp model Metallica use for their high gain presets live. And then we also have the JP2C Plus modeled in here. You can see there's this presence shift control that I've got engaged for this particular model. I really like it. This one has an incredible amount of gain on tap. It is generally just a little bit darker sounding, but again, if you use the tricks we did before where you can change the pre-gain to get the distortion character, you can compensate with the graphic EQ. This is a great model as well. I kind of prefer that one for the lead stuff. If I was going for super tight thrashy stuff, I would either go for the C++ or the straight up USA lead, but the great all-rounder for me is this USA lead mid-gain. One last little trick, let's say I wanted on scene 1, I wanted this to be my main rhythm guitar sound, and for scene 2, I wanted that to be my lead, and what I want is I want this fat switch to kick on. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to right-click it and assign it to control switch number 1. Let's do that. Then we can go into the modifiers menu over here, the controllers, and let's go to control switch per scene. I'm going to set them all off, but I'm going to have scene 1 off and scene 2 on. What this means is when I switch over to scene 2, that control switch is going to be engaged, so it's going to turn the fat switch on for my lead scene. When I go back to scene 1, it's going to be off by default, which is really, really lovely. That will give me that slightly tighter rhythm guitar sound. So what I'm going to do now is just switch between scene 1 and scene 2 on my foot controller, and you can have a listen to how seamlessly that control switch kicks in and gives me that nice thickening effect. As always, the beauty of these devices is that you can dial these in to suit your own preferences and really find the sweet spot for your own sound. Think of all these tips and tricks as a starting point, and then use your ears and not your eyes when you're dialing in these particular amps. In fact, that kind of applies to all the amp models and all the tones in the Fractal ecosystem. But I find with these USA lead models, it really pushes us as guitar players because, you know, there's that guitar player psychology where you want to see everything basically in the middle. This totally breaks all of that, and they can be really liberating amps to dial in. Thanks so much for watching the video. If you have any further questions, let me know in the comments. Until next week, stay excellent, and thanks for watching.